Hello and welcome to the Bougie in a Backpack podcast. I'm Mackenzie from Travel Mackenzie, and I'm here today with Claire from Pistachio Go. Claire is a travel confidence coach, passionate about helping women to put themselves first, pursue their solo travel dreams, and explore the world with confidence. Claire has lived in 4 countries, traveled to more than 60 countries, and taken well over 1,000 flights. So welcome, Claire.
Thanks, Mackenzie. It's fantastic to be here. Looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah. So can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you first got into travel? Like, what did travel look like for you growing up? And is it something you were always interested in?
Yeah, it's such a great question and such a key part of my story. As a child, for whatever reason, I was absolutely fascinated by the idea of travel. And I would go to the travel agent as a kid and get stacks of travel brochures, because back in the day, we did all our research looking at brochures, not online. And I would just pore over those travel brochures for hours on end, picking where to go, picking which hotel to stay in, putting itineraries together, looking at the atlas. But we didn't have the money to take vacations. So these were all trips that were literally just in my head. And I always joke that as an adult, I've been making up for that lost time. So as soon as I got out to work and got out of some of my student debt and could start traveling for myself, I got going with travel and really haven't looked back since. So I think that's also why I've ended up I don't always travel solo, but being someone who will embrace solo travel, because I just really understand this concept of having a limited amount of time and so much world to explore.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's very true for a lot of people. They, are interested in travel growing up and maybe they couldn't do it, or there's like a lot of limitations, whether they're not their real limitations like financial, or if sometimes it just seems like a scary thing to do if it's not something you've been exposed to.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, with my clients, some of whom are in their 60s, even 70s, they've had various different travel backgrounds. So it can work both ways, right? You can have grown up not really traveling. And so the older you get, the more we get a sense of our mortality and smaller things become bigger things in our mind. But it can also be that as a child, maybe there were some less than comfortable travel experiences, perhaps adventurous parents who took you to places as a kid that were maybe a little bit beyond your comfort zone, or a particularly turbulent flight at an impressionable age, which translates into feeling afraid of flying as an adult. So there's pros and cons on both sides, I think. But I think the key message really is about wherever you are in your travel journey, wherever you've been, that doesn't have to define where you're going in the future. And however old or young you are at heart and in actual physical age, there's still time to go and create more memories and really make your travel dreams come true, whether or not that's solo. But particularly for those who want to be traveling solo or need to be traveling solo, just building the belief that that's possible is so key.
Yeah. So for you, where were you in life when you started really getting into travel? Like, were you like in your early 20s, or was it like during college? And what was your first really big trip that you took?
Yeah, it's funny actually, because I realize now I have been traveling for 4 decades.
Wow.
In my teens, 20s, 30s and 40s. And I've solo traveled in all of those decades as well. And I've solo traveled as a single lady, as a newly heartbroken lady, while I've been in a relationship, since I've been married, because friends were too busy, because I just moved town or country and didn't know anyone to travel with, and just purely out of choice because I just really wanted some me time. So across the time that I've been traveling, I've just had such a wide range of different experiences. And I think that's why when clients come to me, I can really put myself in their shoes and empathize with where they are, because the chances are I've been there or close to them in some way, shape or form. I would say my first biggest trip, if that makes sense, was when I was, I believe, 21.
Okay.
And I had just been living in Germany for a year as part of my degree. And then I backpacked around France for the summer. And so I had a brilliant time, also ran into plenty of challenges along the way. So the first challenge was that because I had been in Germany for 10 months and I had the advantage of living with 2 native German speaking student teachers,
Cool.
every time I tried to speak French, just some German would come out of my mouth, or I would say a wonderful French sentence, but in the German word order. For anyone who feels that language is a struggle for them when they're traveling, even though I have mastered a couple of languages at the time, now it's very rusty, language can still be a challenge. It's always a challenge. My mum had just watched a documentary on TV before I set off backpacking with my giant, I don't know how many liters backpack, where people were pushing backpackers over onto their back, and then they couldn't get up because of the weight of their backpack, and then mugging them. So my mum was terrified about me going up on this trip. Of course, I was entirely fine, no problems at all. I was a little bit worried at the time about being lonely, which I know that's something that for a lot of people that are considering solo travel, that comes up for them. And actually, the way it turned out, it was quite the opposite. I met so many people along the way, so many people who wanted to hang out, who wanted to see the sights, who wanted to go for dinner, that by the end of it, I was just really craving some alone time and just some time to do whatever I wanted on that particular day on my terms. So it was an 8-week trip that I took.
Wow.
And really had, obviously a very wide range of experiences. And since then, I don't even know how many solo trips I've taken. I should count that up at some point. Some of them very comfortable and luxurious, some of them more challenging.
Yeah.
But I think that first trip and just knowing that I could do that, have a good time, overcome challenges that came up along the way, really gave me, it was a baptism of fire, but it gave me a great foundation for all the travels I've done since.
Yeah. So that's where you kind of caught the travel bug, like officially.
Yeah. Yes. Like I say, for some reason, I think going all the way back to being a 2-year-old and sitting with my granddad and looking at the children's encyclopedia, the bug was kind of implanted in me super, super young. But that trip and then things I'd done while I was living in Germany, just take like weekend trips then. And I'm just thinking that probably is the first time I really went anywhere for any length of time and thrived and made travel a priority for my life. Before that, I'd done a couple of things like school exchanges, been terribly homesick, cried my eyes out. All of that stuff had happened. But I think this was, you're right. You're absolutely right on reflection. I think this was the trip that set me up for the bug for life.
Yeah. So then after that, how did you start incorporating travel into your life? I think you had mentioned that you were, once you got some of your expenses down, you were able to travel more. How did that all work out for you?
Yes. So one key dynamic, I think, is, so I'm from the UK, I'm living in the US now, but in Europe, people are much more protective and proactive of their annual leave, their paid time off. So one kind of really important thing was just, for me, it's called vacation time for a reason. And so the concept of taking a day off work, of using some of your PTO and then just doing a staycation or staying at home, just that doesn't exist. So really maximizing the time available. And even in my very first job, I think I had 5 weeks of vacation that I could use each year. So having the time removes one of the constraints that I know a lot of people here have to try and work around and create the flexibility for. So the time building block was in place. As I got out of student debt, I could start to prioritize travel over fancy handbags or shoes or eating out at top restaurants or whatever. And so then that gave me the financial means. And then whether it was by myself or with friends, I think you just then gravitate to people that have the similar priorities and hobbies as you. So then I was, whether it was boyfriends that I had in the past or some of my closest friends, there was always somebody who was willing to go on the trip with me, or as I said before, there wasn't, and sometimes even if there was, I would just choose to go alone. And then I think it just got into a virtuous circle from there. So as I got a bit more seasoned in my career and the finances opened up a bit more, then I was able to start taking more of the trips I wanted. Yeah, just took it from there. And then when I moved to the US, for a while, I was really good about protecting that European vacation
Yeah.
mindset. And then the longer I've been in the US, the harder it gets.
Yeah.
Now, I'm doing my own thing here with Pistachio Go, so I can create some flexibility in my schedule. I traveled to Europe. I spent 2 months in Europe in November, December. I spent 3 or 4 weeks in Europe earlier last year as well. My husband, he's working in a US corporate job, so he has 3 weeks of PTO. So he obviously can't travel with me all the time, but because I'm fine traveling by myself, that isn't such a big deal. Get your time, like maximize it as much as possible. And I know you and Angel are experts at figuring out how to squeeze every single public holiday around those PTO days and vice versa. And then, as Shebs was talking about as one of your previous guests, actually, like, that budgeting is not so much about budgeting for the trip. It's about budgeting differently at home in order to have the funds available for those trips. And that's absolutely, he called them sacrifices. I think of them as trade-offs. And so for me, it's about priorities and trade-offs to make the travel happen.
Yeah, you brought up a couple of interesting points. Like, one is the budgeting for, like, the monetary budgeting for travel, right? Like, spending time, like, surrounding yourself with people who have similar mindsets in terms of, like, how we're going to prioritize. Like, are we people who, like, there's some friends that you hang out with that you only go to, like, fancy dinners with, right? And then, so it's like, you kind of, like, it makes a big difference if you are spending your time, like, if that's what you value, then of course, like, spend your money where you want to. But if you would rather, spend time with friends, like going on a walk or something, and then save that money to go on a trip, like, that's like one way to think about, like, how you prioritize money. And then also, like, the other side of it is the time. Like, it's not just budgeting your money, but if, especially in the US, like, yeah, we have such limited time off. Like, you have to think about if you're taking a day off. And I'm like this, where, because I'm just used to how it is in the US. It's like, if I'm taking a day off, like, I better be going somewhere. Like, it's like, I never just take a day off and, like, stay home. Like, I'm always taking a day off so that I can go somewhere and, like, or, like, stack it onto a holiday or something like that.
Yeah, no, exactly. Those are both key points. As Tony Robbins always says, we're the average of the 5 people we spend the most time with. So who are you going to surround yourself with that's going to enable you to create the funds that provide for the travel that you want to do? And yeah, when I was younger, gosh, I remember I would, like, one time I went to Thailand, for example, and I had my big suitcase in the office, and I left the office, got on the tube in London, went to Heathrow, flew overnight to Thailand, had 8 or 9 days in Thailand, flew back overnight to Heathrow, got the tube to the office, did my day in the office, and then went home. Nowadays, particularly with the advantage of being a solopreneur, I can take my time a bit around the travel and work, but they're still, they're a lot more blended these days as well, particularly obviously doing something in travel. But yeah, I was going to say something else about when you were talking about the people that you surround yourself with. Yes. So for a lot of the ladies that I work with, part of their challenges is that they find it hard to find those right people to surround themselves with. And often they will have people around them who are negatively almost detracting from their solo travel goals and encouraging them not to travel. And so that is a real challenge for people. I had that advantage of, I had friends who love travel as well. But if you're someone who doesn't, and you're saying, well, this is all very well, Claire and Mackenzie, but my circle is not supporting me, then that's where, people like yourselves, communities like Bougie in a Backpack can be a really great place to go hang out and to meet like-minded people, even if it is virtually and just over this wonderful thing called the internet, Facebook groups as well. So there are plenty of supportive people out there, and plenty of people who will encourage you to go for your travel dreams, if those who are closest to you for whatever reason are not doing that.
Oh, that's so true. Because, I feel like I've gotten to the point where I've surrounded myself, like, both virtually and, like, in person with people who, like, I've just, like, normalized travel so much that when I'm like, oh yeah, I'm going on a trip, like, I'm leaving on Friday and going on a trip, and, like, solo, and no one, like, maybe, like, years ago, like, maybe 10 years ago, I'd be, like, a little shy to tell people that, because then they'd be like, oh, who are you going with? And I'd be like, by myself. And that's, like, it's also, like, something that I don't think is embarrassing. I think it's something to be proud of. But, like, some people, there's different, ways to look at things. And some people might be, like, not want to say that they're going solo traveling because it makes it look like, oh, like I don't have any friends or something, like just like things like that, where having the normalizing things that may seem odd to others and surrounding yourself with people who normalize those things can get you to do the things that you really love and you really enjoy.
It's so true. And just quickly on your first point there about being fully surrounded by people in travel, my husband will say to me all the time about my high need for travel and like the volume of travel that I would ideally do. He's like, you do realize you're in the top 1%, don't you? So for anyone listening to this that is looking at the travels that Angel and Mackenzie do, for example, they are definitely in the top 1%, if not the top 0.1%. So what's normal to them, don't worry if that doesn't feel normal to
Yeah,
you.
that's true too on the other end.
And then the second point you made around normalizing solo travel, this is a key part of my messaging. And really, it's why I show up every day to do what I do and why I'm really keen to help as many ladies as I can to get out there and not wait on other people to go and make their travel dreams a reality, but actually start living them, doing them solo, making them their real life stories rather than just those maybe one day dreams. And unfortunately, there are still a lot of stigmas around solo travel. I absolutely think it's getting better. And I think there's some really strong, particularly female voices who are making a big difference to help normalize solo travel. But if it's something that you haven't done before and you have people around you, like you were saying, Mackenzie, does it look like you just don't have any friends? Nobody wants to spend time with you. Well, actually, spending time with yourself can be the most valuable gift you can give yourself, and getting to know yourself better and then showing up better for other people. It's really a statement of confidence, not a statement of any sort of inadequacy. And the ladies that I've worked with who have taken their first solo trip as a result of that, the word they use most often to describe how they feel as a result is liberated. And I think that's just such a powerful emotion. I absolutely love it. For me, as someone who travels solo, even though I'm married, and even though is not the right phrase to use, there's nothing wrong with traveling solo as a married woman or a married man. Like, that's awesome too. And I think we get in our own heads a lot, and we think that people are paying attention to us, judging us, passing opinions about us. Even if they are, firstly, who cares? That's their business and up to them what they think. But one of my favorite mantras that I repeat to myself when I find myself getting into my own head is, hang on, Claire, everyone is watching their own movie. You think they're paying attention to you, but they're not. They're just paying attention to themselves and their story and what's going on in their life right now. So again, that's something that it's a very simple phrase, but just I practice repeating it to myself if I feel some of that. Like you were saying, you're super well traveled, often traveling by yourself, but every so often just have that little confidence or mindset wobble of, am I being judged here? And it's like, no, because everyone's watching their own movie.
Yeah, that is the most liberating feeling. That the second you realize like nobody cares about you, like, you know what I mean? Not in a bad way, but like nobody like nobody's watching you. Nobody's looking at you the way you think you are. It's not like, that feeling you have in maybe like in middle school or high school where you're like walking through the cafeteria, like with your food or something, and everyone's staring at you, but like really everyone's like too busy. Everyone's so concerned about themselves. Like everyone's very self-absorbed. Once you realize that, it's like, it's very freeing. Like you can do whatever you want.
It's only in the movies, right, that everyone's actually like staring you down as you walk through the cafeteria. Yeah. And the other thing is, you actually never know if someone is looking at you. You never know if you're inspiring them.
Yeah.
You don't know if they're sitting there at dinner in Rhodes at the table with their boyfriend or their husband looking at you thinking, oh, actually, you've got the better deal here. You've got a great view. You can soak up the atmosphere. You don't have to make small talk with this guy or whatever. You just don't know what people are thinking. So you could think you're being judged. You could be being judged positively as well.
So how do you build the confidence to solo travel? Like, what would you say for someone who is afraid to take that trip? What would be maybe their first step that they could do to get themselves to build that confidence?
Yeah, so I think this goes back to our conversation about some of the perceptions around solo travel as well. People can feel that to be a legitimate solo traveler, they need to be traveling around the world for 6 months or
Mm-hmm.
immediately going off to a country that they find very unfamiliar and perhaps intimidating to them. And of course, what that is or where that might be is different for everyone. And it's not the case at all. You don't have to solo travel all the time. You don't have to solo travel for a certain length of time. You don't have to solo travel for a whole of a trip to be doing solo travel. So the very first thing I think is just to examine what's the bar you're setting for yourself and consider that if it feels too high for you, it probably is, and it doesn't need to be that high. So it's about understanding where is the edge of your comfort zone and going to that, or ideally just a little bit beyond it, not jumping all the way from your comfort zone into your danger zone. Because then if you do make yourself take the trip, you're just surviving, and that isn't the best way to build the confidence and the skills to gradually expand your horizons and go and see more and more places. So the first thing is just to think about what is the right level of stepping outside of your comfort zone for you. And another way that I describe this often is Rome wasn't built in a day, or don't feel that you need to go straight from 0 to 100. The first step is 0 to 1. And every journey, every growth journey starts with that first step. So I think other people offer this same advice of it can be literally as simple as going to a local coffee shop by yourself and just ordering a coffee. And instead of taking it and walking out with your AirPods in, listening to your podcast, sit at the table in the coffee shop, enjoy your coffee, savor the surroundings. You're not going to die. No one's going to bite your head off.
Yeah.
And from there, go to a museum, and from there, take a day trip, and from there, take a weekend trip, and from there, get on your first flight if it's your first flight. So the exact steps are different for each individual, but it's about finding a manageable step for you and remembering that you just have to take it step by step. You don't need to make some kind of giant leap.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice, especially when you think about just stepping outside your comfort zone just a little bit. Things like dining alone, like going to a restaurant for dinner by yourself is very scary for a lot of people. But once you can do it, on your own, it's very liberating, because then it's like, oh, wow, I can go actually where I want to go. I don't have to try to make plans with someone. I could just go and do it, even if you're at home too. So do you have any tips for dining alone specifically? How do you get yourself pumped up for doing something like that?
Yeah, gosh. So these days, dining alone is actually one of my favorite things to do when I travel solo. I just find it such a treat. But of course, it wasn't always like that. It was not always like that. And there were plenty of trips where I was getting a sandwich from a deli and sitting in the street eating it, because that was avoiding going into a restaurant, having to talk to someone. And so for anyone that does find solo dining intimidating, or ordering a table for one intimidating, you're absolutely not alone. And it's one of the topics that comes up most frequently with people that I'm working with and talking to. And a lot of this, with dining and solo dining, it comes to mindset again, and also to that step by step. So one of the things I love about the US, which is very different to my home country of the UK, is this ability to sit at the bar and eat if you want to. And so I don't think that's, you don't have to sit at the bar if you're dining alone, and you shouldn't feel pressured by the host or hostess to take a seat at the bar. If you want a table, if you want a booth, go ask for it. But if you're trying to build your confidence, I think it's just such a nice, congenial way of being able to have that dining experience, but do it in a very safe and acceptable manner without judgment. And one of the reasons I enjoy it so much is because I just love chatting to bartenders and getting whatever local tips and insights and advice from them. So you've always got that bar option, or a table at the bar, like a high top. And then I think thinking about, if you're a bit nervous about it, plan where you want to go ahead of time, even look at the menu, just make yourself feel like you've already been there in a way, so that when you get there, you've rehearsed the steps already and you're just going through them. And then don't people will say, oh, you shouldn't be on your phone or you shouldn't read a book. If that's what's going to work for you, do that. And then over time, as probably has happened with me, you will find that you don't want your phone and you don't want the book because you actually just want to soak it all in. But sort of an overarching concept I use when it comes to dining alone is shutting down your inner critic and then dialing up the volume on your inner cheerleader, because your inner cheerleader is really, it wants you to go and do the solo dining, and it's proud of you for taking up your space, for asking for that table for one, for treating yourself to that nice dinner. I was in Chicago and I went to, I think the restaurant's called Spiaggia. People from Chicago, apologies that I'm butchering this. It's an institution that now is closed down, Michelin starred. And I got dressed up. I had my clutch. I went, and they were like, oh, yes, Claire, da, da, da. And they gave me an amazing table by the window. It was a beautiful experience. They brought a nice, like a decorated dessert at the end. So it wasn't that I got treated in any way as lesser because I was only one person. If anything, they gave me more special attention, and it was just such a memorable evening. So moving your preconceptions aside about what solo dining might be like and actually embracing it and viewing it as an experiment, see what happens. You might surprise yourself as to how much you enjoy it.
Yeah, and that's something that you can even practice at home too. You can go to a restaurant that maybe you're more familiar with and, just test it out first, and then like kind of like baby steps, like you said. And I like what you said about like setting yourself up and trying to like envision it as much as possible. Like whether it's looking at the menu ahead of time and like thinking about, oh, like what am I going to order? Just so it's like one less decision or one less thing to think about. So you're not, you don't feel like you walk in there and you're like a deer in the headlights. Like one thing I like to do too is I look up on Google Images, like what does the restaurant look like? So you kind of get a feel for the vibe. And then you're like, oh, when you walk in, there's a bar right there. So I could just go sit in the bar. But if there's no seats at the bar, I could see if I can get a table. And they have like high tops, like they have like smaller tables, like just getting a feel for what it looks like, I find is really helpful.
Yeah, that's great. And I love what you just said about practice it in your neighborhood and a restaurant that you know already, because if it's a restaurant you know already, the chances are you might also know the team that work there.
Yeah.
And that will start to get you more comfortable. And at the end of the day, most people are nice people and you can have a good chat, have a good experience. And it's one of the things that's made the biggest difference to my confidence as well, is feeling proud to go and ask for a table for one.
Yeah. So another aspect of solo travel that, gets people a little bit worried is safety. So what do you do to feel safe on your solo travels? And what tips do you have for people who are afraid to travel solo because they're worried about safety?
Yeah, this is another very big topic and one that stops a lot of people from actually moving from thinking to action. And of course, there's all the common sense tips, right? Leave your valuables in the hotel safe, make sure somebody knows where you are, avoid going to sketchy places, get a guide if there's somewhere you want to go that is a little bit more either off the beaten path or can be a bit less secure than places you might be used to. And again, this is another area where it depends a little bit what your start point is as to what feels unsafe to you. So a bit like we were talking about with the confidence piece, wherever you are starting is wherever you're starting, and that's absolutely perfect. And just build up bit by bit. But the main thing is, I think a lot of people go into thinking about solo travel and this question of safety thinking they're going to be somewhere that's unsafe and thinking they're going to be in an unsafe situation. And the most important piece of advice is not to put yourself in an unsafe situation in the first place. So do your research ahead of time, know where to go, make sure you're staying in reputable hotels, booking reputable transport. There's no badge of honor for putting yourself in a sketchy situation. You just don't need to do it. So the first thing is just use your common sense and don't put yourself into a situation that's unsafe. The piece of advice that I give to people that seems to be a little bit more unusual than what you read in a lot of places is about tapping into local networks to get the safety tips and insider tips from those people. So, and you encounter a lot of them on your travels. When you go and get your coffee in the morning, you can chat with the barista. whether it's the hotel bar or like we were just talking about, if you're dining out, like chatting with bartenders, obviously your receptionist or hotel concierge, Uber drivers, taxi drivers, tour guides. A lot of these people, they are brilliant communities in and of themselves and very supportive of one another. And so they're just brilliant people to lean into in general for advice. They have to work antisocial hours often. So they're moving around cities at times that if somewhere is sketchy, they're the ones that will know because they've got to navigate the city at night often and in antisocial hours or when the public transport might not be running. And it's in their interest to keep you safe because they're in the tourist industry and they're relying on tourist industry for jobs. So they will give you good quality advice. So really leaning into those locals is just, I think, something that a lot of people should do more of. And when you get a tip from a local, you can feel more comfortable about it. You know it's up to date, and you can look into their eyes and see that it's a genuine and reliable piece of advice.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. So your topic for our January summit was Proudly Solo, Celebrate Your Solo Travel Status. So if you can give us a little bit of a sneak peek about what you talked about in your topic at the summit. I know we've talked a lot about it today, but what can people who catch your summit, if they decide to get the VIP goodie bag, which if you are interested, you can still get the VIP replays in the show notes where you can check out Claire's presentation. But for those who are interested in getting that, what can they expect to see from your presentation?
Yeah, within the presentation. So it's really almost like a manifesto, I would say, the presentation around normalizing solo travel. I talked through 3 or 4 different myths. A couple of those we've touched on today and busting those myths to try and help people if they fall into one of these categories that other people are putting a stamp on, that they can feel empowered to not listen to others, listen to their own desires and go for it. So there's some myth busting in there. There's some tips in there. I talk a little bit more about the solo dining piece and also about the safety piece and who you can tap into and how you can feel safe and confident. I think I mentioned a couple of apps on there too. And then a little bit about that solo travel philosophy and the manifesto, and really also encouraging people who are very confident traveling solo, like your good self, Mackenzie, to support the solo travelers or would-be solo travelers in their lives, because it's going to take all of us to really open this up. And one thing we haven't touched on today, which is touched on in the presentation as well, is why. Why does this all matter at a bigger level and at a societal level? And I feel like that's becoming more important than ever. And people who grab that wonderful VIP goodie bag, they'll be able to get obviously all the gifts from all the speakers, but the one that I put in there is a guide to dining alone with, I think, something like 14 ways to help quieten that inner critic we mentioned earlier and start listening more to your inner cheerleader. So knowing that that's something that so many people have as a barrier when they think about solo travel, and we've got to eat, right? So it's something we all have to do when we solo travel. If you can bust through that challenge, it can really just make such a big difference to how much you enjoy your trips.
Yeah.
There's so much great food to enjoy around the world as well, right?
I know,
you
it's
just
like the
want to
best
be
part.
making the most of it. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's like my favorite part. So, well, that sounds awesome. So if you guys want to check out the VIP goodie bag, we do have that in the show notes. Thank you so much for joining us today, Claire. If we want to find you on the internet and see what solo travel you're doing or get some help on building up that confidence with our solo travel, where can we find you?
Yeah, I'm on Pinterest at Pistachio Go, and there's lots of links out to assets there. And then, of course, I'm on Instagram at pistachio.go, and that's where you'll catch pictures, tips, guides. And I always have at least a couple of resources there at the link in bio. And so there's 3 that you can grab at the moment. There's foundational solo travel trips if you're solo travel tips, if you're really just getting started. There's my solo travel masterclass, and then a bit more timely, a destination guide for 2025 destinations. I went through about 30 different articles from all the experts and collated one list, because who's got time for that other than people that work in the travel industry? And just sort of a very quick point on that, I believe very strongly that it's important for you to be having your own vision on where you're going and not just stealing others and listening to the experts, because that's, again, where you're going to get not just your head, but your heart committed and involved in wanting to make your dreams a reality. So although it's a destination guide, it really is an inspiration list for you. It's absolutely not telling you where to go, because you should be deciding that for yourself. That's why it's so empowering.
Yeah, awesome. So if you want to check out Claire, we'll link her Instagram as well in the show notes. Thank you so much for joining us today. And if you enjoyed this podcast, we appreciate if you could leave a 5-star rating and a written review. That really helps us to keep putting on this podcast and be able to keep putting on summits. We do have a summit coming up in April, so stay tuned for details on that. And we will see you next week.
Thanks so much for having me, Mackenzie.